Good morning. My name is Mark Baldessari, and I am the President and CEO of the Public Policy Institute of California. Thank you for joining us today. PPIC is pleased to present this virtual program today featuring the findings from the latest statewide survey on Californians and their government. This survey was conducted with funding from the R.J. and Frances Miller Foundation, the James Irvine Foundation, and the PPIC Donor Circle. We thank them for their support. As a public charity, PPIC does not take or support positions on any ballot measure or legislation, nor does it support, endorse, or oppose any political parties or candidates for public office. For today's program, my colleague, Dr. Dean Bonner, will walk you through some of the key survey findings. After the presentation, we will discuss some of our takeaways, and then we will answer some audience questions. If you have a question, please send an email and include your name and an organization to the email address on the screen, ppiceventquestions@gmail.com. We have some time at the end of the program for these questions. I would now like to welcome Dr. Dean Bonner, who is the Associate Survey Director and Research Fellow at PPIC. Dean, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you very much, Mark. And I'm going to go ahead and share my screen so we can get started with the presentation. Alrighty, so first of all, I would like to acknowledge my co-authors on this report. Of course, Mark Baldessari, along with Rachel Lawler and Deja Thomas. So the PPIC statewide survey has been conducting Californians and their government surveys since 1999. And if you're not familiar, the PPIC statewide survey mission is to provide timely, relevant, nonpartisan data on political, social, and economic opinions that we hope will inform and improve state policy making, raise awareness, and encourage discussion. Since 1998, we've conducted nearly 200 surveys and have given a voice to about 400,000 Californians. Today's survey examines public perceptions, attitudes, and policy preferences on state and national issues. Landline and cell phone interviews for this survey were conducted in English and Spanish from March 14th to the 23rd. And we talked to about 1,700 adults and just shy of 1,200 likely voters. And the margin of error was 3.3% for the adults and 3.9% for the likely voters in this survey. So now let's get to what everyone wants to see. Amidst a pandemic and a looming recall, just over half of Californians and likely voters approve of Governor Newsom. Approval today is similar to it was in January and to last February prior to the shelter-in-place order that was made. However, it is about 11 points lower than it was from its peak in May of this year. The governor has overwhelming majority support among Democrats, while just under half of independents and about 1 in 5 Republicans approve of his job performance. His job performance is also buoyed by 2 in 3 in the San Francisco Bay Area who approve of the job he's doing, compared to about half elsewhere. Across racial ethnic groups, whites are the least likely to approve, and there's also a gender gap with women 15 points more likely than men to approve. Now, when it comes to the California legislature, just over half also approve of their job performance. And that's similar to January and also similar to last February prior to the shelter-in-place order. And when it comes to the patterns of approval, there are similar patterns for the California legislature as they are for Governor Newsom, not surprising given the makeup of the California legislature currently. So while signatures are currently being verified, all signs are pointing to a November recall election to potentially remove Governor Newsom from office. If the election were held today, we find that 4 in 10 likely voters would vote to remove Governor Newsom, while 56% would vote to keep Governor Newsom. 8 in 10 Republicans would want to remove the governor, while about half of independents and 8 in 10 Democrats who want to keep the governor. In addition to the partisan divide, there is a gender divide where we find that about half of men supporting the recall, while 2 in 3 women would prefer to keep the governor. We also find majorities across racial ethnic groups want to keep Governor Newsom, with African Americans the most likely to say this and whites the least likely to hold this view. We'll also be tracking this. If the recall election does happen, we'll be tracking this into the future. So this will be definitely interesting to watch. And as California was recovering from the kind of surge that occurred through December and January, in late February, Governor Newsom signed a $7.6 billion COVID relief package, with about half the money being used to send about 5.7 million lower-income Californians a $600 check. The package also includes $2.1 billion for small businesses in California, as well as $400 million for subsidized childcare. We find that overwhelming majorities of Californians and likely voters favor this package. There's strong partisan support among Democrats, with 9 in 10 in favor. We also find 7 in 10 independents favor this plan, compared to just shy of 4 in 10 Republicans who are in favor. There's broad-based support for this aid package, with about 2 in 3 or more across demographic groups favoring this package. Support does decline with rising age and income, and women are more likely than men to be in favor of this package. So despite the tax day deadline being pushed into May, we decided to continue our nearly annual tradition of asking Californians their views about the state and local tax system each March. Nearly half of Californians think that California ranks near the top in state and local tax burden per capita compared to other states, and another 1 in 4 say it's above average. These findings are similar to recent years and mostly in line with the fiscal facts. According to an April 2020 Tax Policy Center report, California ranked 10th in state and local tax collections per capita, according to 2017 data. Today, we find that 2 in 3 Republicans, compared to half of independents, and 4 in 10 Democrats think that the state ranks near the top. And the share saying that California ranks near the top when it comes to tax burden increases with rising incomes. And notably, despite local taxes varying somewhat across locality, nearly half of Californians across all regions of the state think that the tax burden is near the top. So turning to housing costs, while we've seen the price of housing decline somewhat in many places during the pandemic, we still find that about 4 in 10 Californians say they have seriously considered moving away from their part of California. The view has been similar in recent years, but much lower in 2004, when 24% were saying that they seriously considered moving away from their part of California. Younger Californians, African Americans, renters, and Republicans are the most likely to say they have seriously considered moving away from their part of California. Across regions, the share reporting this ranges from 49% in the Bay Area to 37% in the Central Valley. And as you can see, most of those folks who say they are seriously considering moving are considering moving outside of the state, but not somewhere else in the state. So turning to some federal issues, We find that approval of President Biden remains high and is similar to the 70% who approved of his job performance in January, right after his inauguration. Overwhelming majorities of Democrats and 6 in 10 independents approve, compared to about 2 in 10 Republicans. Majorities across regions and demographic groups currently approve of the job performance of President Biden. When we look at our California senators, we find that more Californians approve than disapprove of Senator Feinstein and newly appointed Senator Padilla, although Californians are about twice as likely to be unsure or not have enough information to rate Senator Padilla than they are Senator Feinstein. About 4 in 10 Californians currently approve of the job that Congress is doing, while half disapprove, and this is unchanged since January. However, it's notable to remark that approval is at levels we haven't seen since 2009. So despite the low approval, it is kind of at a high point compared to recent years. And when it comes to their own representative in the House of Representatives, a majority of Californians approve, with Democrats far more likely than Republicans and independents, and women more likely than men to approve of their own House rep. So just prior to our survey beginning, President Biden signed the $1.9 trillion stimulus package. We find about 7 in 10 adults and likely voters are in favor, with Democrats and independents far more likely than Republicans to approve. There is broad-based support for the stimulus package, with more than 2 in 3 across regions and demographic, and about 6 in 10 across, and more than 6 in 10 across demographic groups in favor of this proposal. And while there is broad support, we do find that support for the plan decreases with rising age and income and is lowest among whites across racial ethnic groups. So today, April 1st, vaccine availability becomes more widespread when it extends to Californians 50 and older. And looking forward, on April 15th, the availability will be all Californians 16 and older will be available to try to get the vaccine if they want to. And with this, since January, we've actually seen an increase in the share of Californians saying that they've already received the vaccine or that they will definitely get it. And in fact, since January, it's been a 13-point increase in that category. However, today we still find about 1 in 5 say they will probably or definitely not get the vaccine, and that's similar to the share that we found in our January survey. African Americans remain among the most likely to say they will not get the vaccine, although the share of saying this has dropped 26 points since January. So there's been a lot of movement there. About 4 in 10 Republicans continue to say that they will probably or definitely not get the vaccine, making them the most likely group to hold this view. Comparatively speaking, just 1 in 10 Democrats and 2 in 10 independents say that they will definitely or probably not get the vaccine. So with immigration reform being discussed again at the federal level, and with 2 current bills in the state legislature to expand healthcare coverage to low-income undocumented immigrants, we wanted to take a look at kind of gauge support for these policies. And while it's not certain which type of reform will pass Congress at this time, we wanted to gauge support for one of the biggest components of President Biden's U.S. Citizenship Act of 2021. To do so, we actually repeated a question we asked during the Obama years when immigration reform was being considered. And we actually asked a question about, would you favor or oppose a path to citizenship for undocumented immigrants if they met certain requirements? And notably, just as there was in March of 2015, we find strong bipartisan support for this proposal. We also find that there are 3 in 4 or more across regions and demographic groups who support this proposal. And when asked a general question about just, would you favor or oppose providing health care to undocumented immigrants, we find that 2 in 3 Californians are in favor. However, as you can see, support drops across most groups, but we still find that 8 in 10 Democrats, nearly 6 in 10, and 6 in 10 independents remain supportive. However, there's a much larger drop when it comes to Republicans. Additionally, outside of older Californians, there's actually majority support for providing healthcare coverage for undocumented immigrants at this time. And as racial tensions continue to run high, we wanted to examine California's views on racial discrimination in America today. We find that when asked what's the bigger problem, nearly 6 in 10 Californians say people not seeing discrimination where it really does exist is the bigger problem, while 4 in 10 say that people seeing racial discrimination where it does not exist is the bigger problem. Overwhelming majorities of African Americans and Asians view people not seeing discrimination as the bigger problem, compared to fewer whites and Latinos. We find that 8 in 10 Democrats and independents hold this view, while 2 in 3 Republicans see the bigger problem as people seeing discrimination where it really does not exist. Notably, women are more likely than men to say that the bigger problem is people not seeing discrimination where it actually exists. So we also asked about a few other topics. On the state budget, when asked which of the 4 major areas of state spending should have the highest priority, 4 in 10 Californians say health and human services, and another 4 in 10 say K-12 education. On the current economic situation, about half of Californians currently say the state is in a serious or moderate recession. And when asked about the state and local tax system, about half of Californians say this tax system is at least moderately fair. However, 6 in 10 Californians say that they pay at least somewhat more than they should. And for the first time in our surveys tracking kind of concern about the coronavirus, we find that fewer than half are very or somewhat concerned about getting the coronavirus and requiring hospitalization. This optimism comes at a time when 3 in 4 Californians are saying that the worst of the pandemic is behind us. We also find that positive ratings of the state's vaccine distribution have increased 16 points, and today 52% of Californians rate the vaccine distribution as excellent or good. We also asked some questions about race relations and about kind of political divisions in America. And we find that Californians are divided on whether they're optimistic or pessimistic that Americans of different political views can still come together and work out their differences. And on race relations, we find that 4 in 10 say that race relations have gotten worse over the last year, and another third say that things are about the same as they have been in recent years. So before I turn it over to Mark, I just want to remind everyone that you can submit questions to ppiceventquestions@gmail.com. And please include your name and your name of your organization when you send in the question. At this time, I want to invite Mark back, and we are going to continue our conversation as Mark gives us some of his key takeaways.
Thank you, Dean. That was a great summary, and thank you for all the work that you and everybody else in the survey team did on the March survey report. Certainly very, very timely information for Californians about their views about the government. So both state and national. Just wanted to make a couple of comments to follow up on some things that Dean mentioned in passing. Obviously, the part of the survey that got the most attention to date, at least, was about the questions about the governor's recall, which is the first time that we've asked about the governor's recall this year. In 2003, we asked about the recall of Governor Davis 4 times, in June, July, August, and September, before the October 2003 recall of Governor Davis. So we rely on that previous work to offer some perspective, and that's reflected in a blog post that you can read up on the PPIC website attached to this particular survey report. So being a pollster, always a humbling experience. There are things that you know, things that you thought you knew, and things that you go through the process of collecting all the data, and then there's still some questions that need to be answered. And one question which came up quite a bit day before yesterday, when I was doing interviews for this survey, and I asked Dean to look into it yesterday, is the fact that clearly there's a big impact of partisanship on whether or not people support the removal of Governor Newsom, with relatively few Democrats saying that they support his removal, compared to overwhelming proportions of the Republicans and about 4 in 10 independent voters. But the only other demographic in which you've got half of that demographic group saying that they support the recall is men. 50% of men in our poll, compared to 31% of women. So that's a big difference. And one thing that we had speculated on was that, Democratic voters tend to be more women than men. So that may be reflecting Democratic voters' preferences in that gender split. But it turns out, and Dean looked at the data yesterday, and we shared it, that that Democratic women are less likely than Democratic men to support the removal of Davis, and also, the pattern of differences between men and women persists among Republicans and independent or declined to state voters. So that is something that we'll continue to explore in our survey. But that led me, when we saw that finding, to go back to look at some of the other findings in the survey in which there were gender differences, and there were several that were noteworthy. So the difference that we saw in for Governor Newsom and the recall, we also saw that that women were more likely to approve of Governor Davis than men. And President Biden, women were more likely to approve than men. And Senator Feinstein, women more likely to approve than men. And newly appointed Senator Padilla also. So there is an important role going beyond the role of party, that support among women today can be found in support for Democratic elected officials. And Dean, did you want to speculate on this anymore?
No, I mean, I would just add that women are more supportive of the 2 kind of stimulus packages that we asked about. And I think in general, they're somewhat more likely to be concerned about the coronavirus, and some of those questions we've seen over time. There's also been a gender gap when it came to the coronavirus as well. And so I think that potentially could be playing a part of all of this as well.
Yeah. And then there are issues around, we had an event last Thursday, about women and the pandemic economy, certainly issues around the economy. that are affecting women more than men today as well. So anyway, those I mentioned this for our audience as well as for us, the pollsters, because this is something we want to be watching as we go through this year and the special election, and then also the election next year that will follow. So to me, one of the most important findings in the survey was around the number of people who say that they will definitely not or probably not take the vaccine. And that was about 1 in 5 when we did the survey in January. And as Dean noted, we've had a lot more people now who've taken the vaccine and will be taking the vaccine in the next month or two. And the fact that the number who are hesitant to take the vaccine didn't change between January and March, despite the fact that there's been more of a public information campaign around the vaccine and its safety and availability, and people looking around and seeing people around them getting the vaccine. That 1 in 5 number is one that we will be following, when we're in the field and do the survey again to see whether that 20% number is a hard number in terms of the willingness to take the vaccine, because that then has implications for what will it take to get to herd immunity, to get more people vaccinated, and to reduce the dangers and increase public safety. Dean, did you have any comments you wanted to make about that?
Yeah, well, I thought it was notable that while the findings on the definitely not or probably not get the vaccine are similar to January, that's despite a 26 point decrease among African Americans in that category. And so the fact that you saw that big of a jump, but then you still see this 1 in 5 is really remarkable. And also you're seeing a kind of, there's still about 4 in 10 Republicans who are saying, and that's similar to what we saw in January, who are saying they definitely or probably not get the vaccine. Mm-hmm. So there's work to do on a couple of fronts here, it seems.
Yeah, for sure. And what about what's going on? There's been a lot of mention about partisanship around the vaccine. Do you think that's one of the factors?
I mean, there's definitely been, if you look at kind of the national polls, there's the same kind of reluctance. And it's quite interesting to me because at the same time, there is a reluctance among Republicans to want to get the vaccine. There's also a lot of chatter about making sure that the prior president gets credit for the vaccine. And so that to me is just kind of an interesting kind of juxtaposition of two findings that the other day I was kind of like, just a little dumbfounded in some ways.
And how that's all going to be sorted out over time. So one of the things that I noticed in the survey, which was very different from what we had seen in 2015, the last time we asked the question, in 2007, the only other time, was around the support for healthcare coverage for undocumented immigrants. There is a partisan divide, but for the first time that we've asked that survey question, among likely voters, there was a majority who said that undocumented immigrants, they favored undocumented immigrants getting healthcare coverage. And it was something that I had been quoted as saying, well, the thing that's changed obviously between 2015 and today, most noteworthy the last year, is the fact that that everybody in California has faced a very severe health crisis in which it was important to get as many people out of the danger of COVID as possible to try to stop this pandemic. And there's been a different kind of public health action around the pandemic than I think any of us have ever seen in our lifetime, in terms of everybody can get a free vaccine, everybody can go get tested, this sort of thing. And do you have any thoughts about this as somebody who's followed attitudes towards immigrants?
Yeah, what's interesting is that over these last few years, we've also seen an increase in the share of folks who are viewing immigrants positively, whether it be on a question of what should happen to undocumented immigrants in the country, or just on, are they a benefit or a burden to the state? And so that's something that I think is playing in here, as well as the fact that current state policy allows for lower income undocumented immigrants through age 25 to be eligible for Medi-Cal. So that's kind of a policy change that's already happened. And so that's probably playing a role as well.
Yeah, so maybe the way that healthcare coverage has actually been practiced now is having an impact in thinking about how it needs to be generalized towards the whole population. So one of the questions that also caught my attention was around around race relations, and the 43% said that race relations in the United States today is worse than it was a year ago. And what particularly caught my attention were the differences across racial and ethnic groups. That in this case, in our survey, 50% of Asian Americans said that race relations were worse than they were a year ago, compared to 44% of Blacks, 32% of Latinos, 48% of whites. And among Blacks, Latinos, and whites, the proportion who said that race relations has gotten worse has all declined by double digits. But among Asian Americans, it was just 5 points. And then the other finding around Asian Americans is that in our last two surveys, which were both taken during the pandemic, half or more of Asian Americans said that race relations had gotten worse. And that was a higher number than we saw in the two times that we asked that same question during the Trump administration, September 2017 and January 2019. So it seems to me, in looking at this and thinking about the attention to Asian hate crimes that we have seen since the issue and the concerns about it, and in particular the impact specifically on the Asian community, that might be reflected in these findings.
Yeah, it seems so. It's definitely a trying time for race relations in America, and that's, I think, saying a lot.
Yeah, and the related to the question on the questions we asked about race relations, and then we'll turn to some of the audience questions. And I think particularly in reference to the fact of what we have going on right now today in terms of a trial that's taking place in Minneapolis almost a year after the tragic killing of George Floyd, is that attitudes among African Americans in terms of their feelings about fairness in the criminal justice system, in particular, whether African Americans feel that they can almost always, or most of the time, that the police in their community treat all racial and ethnic groups fairly. That number hasn't changed. It's less than 1 in 5 African Americans today, as was the case last September, saying that only 1 in 5, which is far fewer than in any other racial and ethnic group. So attitudes have not changed since last fall.
Yeah, not at all. I think, it's just 1% who say almost always, which is very similar to what we've seen in the past. And so, yeah.
And I just want to leave with one thought, and that was about the 1 in 3 Californians who said that they were going to leave the state because of the cost of housing. That 1 and 3, which is not that different from what we had seen earlier. That's something we're going to be watching and thinking about as it relates to not just the pandemic, but the long-term trends that have been occurring in California in terms of our population growth and losing population to other states as our cost of housing has become such a big factor. So we have some questions in chat. One question says, the survey finds that budget priorities for Californians today are basically unchanged from a year ago, despite the pandemic. Would you have expected them to change somewhat, like with a larger share wanting to prioritize spending on health and human services?
I mean, K-12 education is consistently valued and kind of seen as extremely important, whether it's asking for more taxes or how to prioritize the spending. And so it's not all that surprising considering just the focus that many Californians have on K-12 education. And you could say that the pandemic has potentially shown a spotlight on this system where buildings and infrastructure are potentially playing a limiting role when it comes to reopening schools. And so not too surprising.
And maybe also when you think about it, the issues around distance learning and how many students didn't have the resources for distance learning and needing those resources, not just in school, but in the home. Here's a question that came in from our audience. I'm surprised by the numbers for Latinos on the racial discrimination in America slide. Curious to know which of those Latinos surveyed are new immigrants versus second generation Latinos and beyond.
We don't have information in this survey on the generational aspects, but I was really struck by that number and did a little bit of research. And what I found is that there is a difference when you look at which language Latinos chose to take the survey in. So survey respondents can choose to take it in Spanish or English according to their preference. And those who are, and there were just really stark differences with those taking it in Spanish, less likely to hold the view that the bigger problem is discrimination exists, that people do not see discrimination where it actually exists. And that was kind of a similar trend when you looked at the other findings. So there's something, and we know that language is oftentimes a generational kind of plays a role there. So there was that we could provide.
Yeah. Thank you. Okay, another question. Why do you think there are such disparate views on immigration questions with such strong bipartisan support for a path to citizenship, yet a deep divide on health coverage for undocumented immigrants?
I mean, I think it kind of comes down, at least the way I've been thinking about it, as providing citizenship is not necessarily providing something that costs money, so to speak, right? So I think people may perceive providing undocumented health coverage for undocumented immigrants as something that's going to cost the taxpayer, whereas providing citizenship, it's kind of like, oh, then these people can work and contribute more to society or whatnot. And so that's the way I've been viewing it. I'm not sure if that's, kind of accurate, but that's kind of, given the stark differences between Republicans on these two questions, that to me kind of led to that thinking.
Thank you. Last but not least, one of the favorite questions that we get as pollsters. What surprised you most about the survey findings, Dean?
I mean, I guess the juxtaposition between the support for the actual federal stimulus package and the views on whether or not they think it's too much or not enough, or like just saying if it's too much or too little. The fact that, there were a large number of people saying it's about right, but there was the shares saying that it was too little, and then the shares saying that it was too much. And so that was kind of striking to me. Yeah.
And of course, none of us have a lot of experience with what $1 trillion means, huh? So That
I mean, I've seen the descriptions of how much money needs to be spent per like minute, and they're pretty
yeah,
astronomical, if you really put it in that perspective, which is
yeah,
an odd perspective to put it in, but yeah.
yeah. I think so. For me, I would answer the question by saying the 4 and 10 who said that they wanted to remove Newsom, because I really had no idea. My last experience with a question on recall being in 2003, and all of those surveys, half or more said they wanted to remove Davis. So I didn't know what to expect in this last survey. And for a point of perspective for me, then it was the 38% in the election that in 2018 who voted against Davis, to put that in perspective in terms of what that 4 and 10 means. But surprise in the sense of I don't know what to expect. So
Yeah, so
Dean,
you thought it was
anything else
higher
you
than you might expect or lower than you might expect? Or just kind of surprised in general?
just like one of those where I have no idea where it's gonna land, how much it's gonna be related to anything that we've seen up to then. So and it's just now it becomes the benchmark to compare what happens in our upcoming surveys. And Dean, thank you so much for the comments today. Is anything else you wanted to add before we say goodbye to our audience?
I would just encourage everyone to read your blog post, because the 5 takeaways are extremely interesting. And I really think the 2021 is not 2003 is in many ways just that sums it up right there. The fact that, Newsom isn't necessarily in the same shape as Davis was at near the same time. And so that to me was very striking.
Well, thank you so much for your comments today in the program and your perspective, and your answers to the questions, and for all the work that you do at PPIC. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
So we've reached the end of our program. And once again, thanks to Dean, and thanks to everybody on the virtual events team for making this event possible today. I really appreciate all the work that goes on behind the scenes, before, during, and after, that makes it possible for us to reach our audiences virtually at this time. I'd also like to thank our survey funders. And finally, thanks to all of you for joining us today online. I want to let you know that 2 PPIC Speaker Series virtual events will occur next week. We're very excited about presenting, first of all, our new U.S. Senator Alex Padilla on Tuesday, April 6th at 11 a.m. and our new California Secretary of State, Shirley Weber, on Thursday, April 8th at 11 a.m. Please try to join us for both of those programs. They should be very special. We're looking forward to bringing that to you. Later today, you'll receive a survey about this event, so please tell us what you thought about it, and we look forward to your feedback. Thank you once again. Please be safe and have a good afternoon.